All right. Hi, everybody. How we all doing? La, 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 la. Yeah, okay, I think we could work with that. All right. First of all, I wanted to thank everybody for the very kind messages. For those of you that don't know, I was sick, still kind of am sick, but my voice was pretty much completely shot. I woke up Thursday and couldn't really talk at all, and I was diagnosed with laryngitis. And it was funny because I went to the doctor and explained to her my symptoms and everything, and she's like, yeah, you probably have like an upper respiratory thing. You probably have laryngitis. What do you do for a living? And I'm like, I talk a lot on the internet. And she's like, well, maybe you should not do that for a few days. And I'm like, huh, all right, Doc, you don't understand what's going on in One Piece right now. And then she was like, oh, I read One Piece. No, she wasn't. But still, that was basically it. I'm like, okay, gonna have to go a few days without talking. So I did that other review, which was like the silent movie review. So a lot of people really enjoyed that. I just pulled that out of nothing because I really had nothing. I had to do something. So here we are. I'm gonna try to get through this review, take a break if I have to, I guess. And hopefully we'll be back to regularly scheduled programs sooner or later. This will be chapter 1067 of One Piece, titled Punk Records. I'm going to have to really dial down the screaming and yelling, as in I'm probably not going to have to do any of that. So this is going to be a very chill kind of review. Can you dig it? Can you dig the really chill, relaxed vibe we're doing here? Okay, I'm going to have a sip of sparkling water now and we'll get started. Alright, so we're starting off with the Germa 66's cover story. We have Judge and we have Caesar meeting. The other Germa siblings have all arrived. I'm assuming Judge is really happy that his kids are all still alive. If anything else, just for the fact, like, without them, the whole Germa 66 empire sort of kind of falls apart. I mean, I guess in theory, Judge could have taken the DNA from, like, Ichiji and Niji and just made clones of his sons. But maybe that takes a long time to do, you know, like with the clone tanks and, like, Venture Brothers or whatever, so it's probably best to keep his actual sons still alive. Also, from what we heard and like how he explained it with Sanji, even growing up, even though he viewed Sanji as a disappointment, he still viewed himself as like his father, and like, I can't bring myself to just, you know, eliminate my own son, so that's why he threw him into the dungeon and locked him up with the steel mask, and then eventually just let him go, because even though he's this cold, heartless person, he still has a modicum of humanity in him, I guess. Anyway, Caesar's also there, and Judge sees him, and they begin to argue, and the caption is, you know, I forget, you know, who are you again? And it's Judge versus Caesar, and they just begin to argue there. Judge has his Garuda, he has, like, the giant spear he uses to fight, and Caesar's all gaseous and everything like that. So, some interesting stuff, though, now that we know a little bit more about Vegapunk, how Vegapunk is currently 65 years old, Judge is 56, and Caesar is 40, which means that I like to think that Mads was still in operation, maybe right before Roger's execution, so that was 24 years ago. So it would have been when Vegapunk was probably in his early 40s, like let's say around 40 years old. You know, Judge is less than 9 years apart from Vegapunk, so that would put him in his early 30s, or late 20s, I guess. And I don't think Caesar was part of Mads. I mean, I guess he could have been. I like to think that after Vegapunk joined the world government, Caesar was like the government's top scientist before Vegapunk came around, you know what I mean? And then after Vegapunk joined in, Caesar and Vegapunk kind of had to work together, sort of like Walter White and Gale from Breaking Bad, and we all know how that went down, right? So, yeah, it might have been a thing like that. Although it is also funny for me to think that, you know, 24 years ago, some such like that, or even further back maybe when they were working in Mads, if Caesar did work in Mads, he would have been like, you know, 16 at the time, so it would have been funny if he was like the dorky lab assistant or whatever. Like, you have Vegapunk and Queen and Judge that are like doing all this really complicated research with DNA and the lineage factor and cloning technology and all this devil fruit research, and then there's just like, Caesar, wash my beaker, and Caesar's like, okay, sir, I'll get right to that, sir. I'm so sorry, sir. You know, like that kind of stuff. Like, he was just this pimple-faced dork, you know, running around the lab or something, and now he's like his own scientist, but he's always feels outclassed by everybody else. That would be kind of funny. So we continue where we left off last chapter with Vegapunk, the real Vegapunk, making his appearance in front of Bonnie, Luffy, Chopper, and Jinbei's group in the junkyard, right in front of the giant robot that was purportedly invented or created, during the Void Century or even prior to the Void Century, okay? So the first question that Bonnie has is, like, what happened to your head? Because it was stated that Vegapunk's head was much larger than it is right now, to which Vegapunk simply replies, I cut it off. It was getting too big, so I had to cut it off. And we actually see a silhouette of it, and it's so funny because the silhouette of Vegapunk's real head, like how big it should be if he didn't cut it off, actually goes behind the panels. So I shaded it out to a way like this should have been like Vegapunk's actual body shape right here, okay? Bonnie likens it to like a giant light bulb, and Vegapunk explains, like, well, the reason why I could do all the stuff that I could do, I could cut off my head and everything like that, and the reason my brain was big enough to begin with was because I ate the Nomi Nomi no the Nomi Nomi no. So the name of the fruit is literally the Nomi Nomi no Mi. So you could see why that would be a little bit of a tongue twister, and Vegapunk has a giant tongue already, so he just like bites his tongue right there, and it's the brain fruit. I ate the brain fruit. Now, this is fascinating to me because I never assumed that Vegapunk would have eaten a devil fruit, you know what I mean? Now, Oda doesn't go the route with it where I ate the devil fruit, therefore that's what makes me a genius. He clarifies that I was already born a genius. All the brain fruit does, it doesn't give me, increased intelligence or like gives me all the knowledge of the universe or anything like that. All the brain fruit does is allow him to infinitely store all the information, all the knowledge, everything he's ever read, every book, every, visual Den Mushi documentary series. I don't know what they have in the One Piece world. All of that information infinitely in the brain. So he has like a perfect photographic or eidetic memory, essentially. However, because this is One Piece and logic, of course, if you learn more stuff, obviously your brain's gonna keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So in this case, Vegapunk's brain got so big, it was on the level of a giant. They even compare him to that. They said, oh, you're about on the level of a giant, and Jinbei even mentions, yeah, I thought I heard that your brain was pretty big. Keep in mind, giants are, even at their smallest, about 12 meters tall. Big Mom and Kaido and Whitebeard were really large characters, but they did not even meet the definition of what it means to be a giant, okay? Now, I was trying to get a handle on exactly how tall Vegapunk is with his head cut off, like how he is right now. So his body, like as in his torso, his arms and head are relatively small, but his legs are really long. Vegapunk's got legs, ladies and gentlemen. He's definitely taller than Luffy. I don't think he's taller than Jinbei. I would probably liken Vegapunk right now to maybe around 9 feet tall, probably around the same height as like Brook, okay? He's definitely taller than Luffy and Chopper and Bonnie in this chapter, but that's mostly with his legs. Now, with his head, if he had his complete head, he would probably be on the size of like some of the smaller giants from Elbaf, so rather impressive brain that he has there. I also find it rather funny because, okay, in Japanese, no, as in N-O-U, can mean brain. It can also mean memory in a certain context. So I find it funny that it's the brain fruit that allows you infinite, like, storage or memory rather than the Memo no Mi, which is the devil fruit that is used by Charlotte Pudding, okay? Whereas Pudding doesn't really have infinite memory on her own. At least that was never explained that she could do that. Rather, she manipulates the memories of others. She can remove memories and edit them and then put it back into them, give memories to other people that other people had to begin with, you know what I mean? Like switch memories around. That was more her ability, and Vegapunk's is more about like his physical brain actually getting larger, okay? So I guess one day it just got so big that he couldn't take it anymore. He probably couldn't even walk with that brain. And also, it's like the op fruit with Law. It's like, this is the perfect person to get this fruit. Okay, Law, being a doctor, was the perfect recipient for the op fruit. Do you think any random person that doesn't know anything about, medical science or surgery eats the op fruit, he would be able to do everything that Law can? No, he wouldn't. The same thing, like if I ate the brain fruit, and then you give me a book of advanced physics, like, yeah, with the brain fruit, I'll be able to memorize every single page of that advanced physics book perfectly, but I don't know anything about advanced physics. I don't know anything about regular physics, okay? So, like, yay, I now have a bunch of pages of an advanced physics book in my head, of all these equations and diagrams, and I have no idea what to do with it. So the fact that Vegapunk had to be a genius already just makes him even greater of a genius, because now he can just store everything in his brain indefinitely. However, because he cut off his brain, he had to kind of, think outside the box here. So the giant egg that's floating above Egghead Island right now in the Labosphere, okay, where Robin and Sanji's group are at right now with Shaka. So up there, you see on the bottom half of the egg, it says Punk Records. Well, that's actually the hangar for Vegapunk's brain. So it's not even like he took his giant light bulb, giant-sized brain, and then divided into 6 bodies, and then there are the satellites. No, he literally took all of the knowledge he had, and he threw it into an airplane hangar, because, or maybe a blimp hangar. I mean, it's big, it's huge, okay? So it's like, that's how much knowledge this guy has, okay? So there's like a center for all his knowledge there, and I'm sure that hangar is probably reinforced with like a lot of steel and metal, because like the second he says that all my knowledge is in that egg, I was kind of getting a little nervous. I'm like, oh no, what happens if like the Cypher Pole attack and then like, Seraphim Kuma fires a laser at that hangar or something and it blows up? Like, what happens if that hangar is destroyed? What happens if they send that Uranos laser weapon that nuked Lelucia? Like, what happens if that's destroyed? That's not good. Although the Cypher Pole did get orders to not destroy anything on Egghead. Maybe actually the government knows that it's there. Maybe the government knows all of his knowledge is in that hangar, so we can eliminate the man because all the knowledge is right there. Although if he dies, would that make all the knowledge disappear? Vegapunk's pretty smart. He probably made copies of his brain. He probably took out all of his memories, took out all of his knowledge, added it onto the computer, copy pasted it, made a few different versions of it so that, it wouldn't be deleted, because one copy is none copy, you know what I mean? Anyway, he states that, I have the world's largest brain in this hangar, and I want this knowledge to continue to expand. Using this Apple antenna on my head, I kind of synchronize with Punk Records once a day, so all the knowledge that I learned just gets sent back there. It's kind of like Wi-Fi. Chopper is really excited. He's basically like, wait a second, so you have like medical knowledge too? And Vegapunk is like, yes, of course. And so that's actually really impressive for Chopper, because remember, Chopper's whole dream, the whole reason he's traveling with Luffy, is he wants to become the greatest doctor in the world that can cure any illness. There's no medicine in the world that's a cure-all, but he wants to be the cure-all, the doctor that can cure any illness. And so obviously when he was studying at the Torino Kingdom, that was a lot of knowledge that, didn't exist anywhere else in the world. Kind of the same thing here, where Chopper's like, wait a second, I can just go to online med school now. I don't have to worry about traveling the world or anything, right? So this is very fascinating, because we are introducing basically the concept of like Wikipedia or the internet into One Piece, which is great, because if there was anybody that was going to invent it, it would be Vegapunk, right? Or have the capacity to create the internet, it would be Vegapunk here. Luffy has a little bit of a moment where he's just like, wait a second, so since you cut your brain out, that makes you an idiot, right? And that's, you know what, I would say that's Luffy logic, but no, if you seriously think about it, like, if you walked up to somebody and half their head was missing, you'd be like, so your brain's gone, you're stupid, right? And be like, I'm not stupid, what? Just because I have half my brain cut out? Actually, fun fact, I believe you can remove half of your brain and you wouldn't be like brain dead or anything. You could still function with half of your brain. Of course, there would be noticeable things that you wouldn't be able to do anymore, but at least I remember watching an episode of House once where that happens, so if, Hugh Laurie says it's true, I'm going to go ahead with it. Now, if the situation with Vegapunk's brain is in a giant blimp hangar, essentially, what's with the satellites then? Okay, so Vegapunk explains that a little bit. There's a really funny scene where he says, oh, you met a girl earlier, Atlas, that claimed to be Vegapunk, right? Well, she's one of my clones, right? So I have 6 of them that live on this island with me, and Luffy's immediate response is like, wait, you have 6 clones? You're a ninja? And I find that funny for 2 reasons. Number one, it's obviously a reference to Raizo using like the clone jutsu, but it's also a Naruto reference, because in Naruto there's Pain, who has the 6 paths of pain, you know what I mean? So I feel like Oda was doing like a double layered joke there just for Luffy because obviously Luffy wouldn't know anything about pain. Well, his brother died in front of him right in his arms, so he would probably know something about pain, but not like pain from like Naruto, right? So I think there's like a double layered joke joke there. So each of Vegapunk's clones do not have like, it's not like, you know, 1/7 of, you know, his knowledge is in Atlas, 1/7 in Lilith, Shaka, York, Pythagoras, Edison, and then his real body is divided up that way. It's more like they're the actual clones of him, and he says that if you were to take all of them together, you would get his real personality. Good, evil, flair, wisdom, desire, and wrath. If you put them all together, you get his real personality. But because their individual dispositions are so different, it just creates a wealth of knowledge. It's sort of like, let's say you have two individuals that are in grad school and they're going for the exact same degree or the exact same, like let's say they're going for physics or whatever, or engineering degree. Let's say you have two individuals that are going for an engineering degree. Those two individuals, even though they might be on the same level of intelligence and they might be going for the same degree, are probably not going to approach it from the exact same angle with the exact same, you know, if they're writing like a doctorate or something, it's not going to be the exact same dissertation or whatever like that, you know what I mean? It's like different perspectives and leads to different outcomes. Okay, so that's probably a smart way why he did that, like not so much so he could split his brain up, but just so that like he can have different viewpoints, different dispositions, different personalities, so they invent different things from angles that he might have never considered just with his main body. Okay, so that's Vegapunk there. It's actually very clever how that works. And just like that just makes the wealth of experience that much greater. Jinbei's having a difficult time to wrap around everything because you have to understand, like, you know, nowadays with like MRIs and stuff, we can scan someone's brain to really understand like what's going on in there, like the electrical signals and the chemicals and stuff that make our brains do what they do. But you got to take it into the perspective of like before any of that existed. Like technology exists in One Piece and they're on Egghead right now, which is huge at technology. But for most of the world, you probably don't know how the brain actually functions. In fact, I have to imagine the brain was probably a great mystery for most of human beings for a lot of our history, right? Like we could probably figure it out that like the brain is like the hub of where like memories are stored, and you know, obviously if someone is brain damaged, they might not be able to like use certain faculties anymore. Like if their brains are damaged in a certain way, they might go blind, you know, stuff like that. But when it comes down to like exactly how the brain functions, it's not tangible. You know, you can't reach out and grab memories or personalities or emotions or anything like that. So Jinbei, being a little bit confused here, is like, I just don't understand this. You know, you all share the same brain, but you're ninjas, but you're clones, but your brain's in a giant blimp hangar. I just brought the kids here to this amusement park to have a good time, Vegapunk. I have no idea what you're saying right now, right? Luffy, obviously, Luffy doesn't have just one question mark in front of his head. He has two, so he's doubly confused right now. It's kind of interesting, actually, that we have Jinbei, Luffy, Bonnie, and Chopper as the four individuals that Vegapunk is explaining all this really complicated science to. Chopper is probably the one that's going to receive the most out of it, honestly, because Chopper is a doctor. He went to medical school. Dr. Kureha gave him a crash course in medical science, so he probably knows the most out of everything that like Vegapunk is explaining. Like if Vegapunk went on and on about like different like medical knowledge, you know, Chopper would be there writing notes like, oh, I understand that, you know. Meanwhile, Jinbei, Bonnie, and Luffy are in the background like, I don't know, man, this guy has an apple sticking out of his head. He looks pretty cool, I guess, right? Anyway, so Vegapunk talks about his dream, what he has in store for the world, and it's a very optimistic kind of viewpoint. Basically, he's like, hey, I want the entire world to get to a point where they can access my knowledge. So I have all this knowledge in the world. I don't want to keep it just on Egghead. I don't want to just keep it for myself or for the world government. I want everybody in the world to be able to access my brain and learn as much as they can about whatever they would want. And then wouldn't it also be great for people all over the world to connect to my brain and then add their own knowledge and input into it? And so therefore, then everybody can share knowledge. So that's why I compared it to Wikipedia, because it basically is the idea that, like, you know, Wikipedia is added to every single day by people all over the planet, you know, adding their collective knowledge there. Although if you just want to go broadly and say it's like he wants to create the internet, that makes sense as well. Maybe they can make Den Den Mushi that can connect to Vegapunk's brain and people can learn through that. This might be an endgame thing. Like we cut to like 20 years later in the One Piece world in like the epilogue where Luffy's the king of the pirates and all that, and we see people, you know, studying in classrooms using, you know, the internet that Vegapunk created, or it'd be called Punk Records in this version, right? Jinbei brings up a very, you know, obvious point, though, something that we know a lot about nowadays with the internet that does exist in our world. Jinbei's like, right, yeah, but if everybody all over the world, anybody could just add their own information to, you know, this Punk Records stuff, then Doesn't that mean... I'm going to use a term that my dad always used. Okay. So my parents are not that computer inclined. My dad probably, like, he's off the grid, as he says it. My dad doesn't really have, you know, social media or anything like that. But when I was a kid growing up and we got our first computer, my dad would always call it the interweb. It's just like, oh, you're on the interweb there. And I'd be like playing RuneScape in like 2005 or whatever and just be like, yeah. It's just like, you're on the interweb, you and the interweb. You know, so that's, okay. So if Jinbei's like my dad, and Jinbei's like, you know, I don't understand this interweb here you're talking about here, Vegapunk, right? So the problem is, though, everybody would add their own biased viewpoints to punk records, right? So it's sort of like, you know, maybe not so much an issue with Wikipedia, because Wikipedia, maybe back in the original days, but nowadays it's a lot more curated a little bit better. But I remember back in the day when Wikipedia was just becoming very prominent in, like, you know, the early mid-2000s, when internet started becoming very prominent in, like, schools where we had, like, laptops and we could go on the internet and everything like that in school. Every teacher I had was like, you know, don't use Wikipedia for your reports. You're not allowed to use Wikipedia for your reports because anybody can just add to it and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, I remember being in middle school and like going on Wikipedia and like just adding random crap to it. And sometimes it stayed on there for a while before it was taken down. Now I think it's a lot more efficient than it was back then. But yeah, I could see Jinbei's concern. And basically Vegapunk's response to that is just like, yes, Jinbei, you know, it makes sense that you would say that and everything, good point. But, you know, we can't let that stop, you know, scientific advancement just because there might be some issues later down the road. Let's just keep on chugging along, right? And so this really ticks off Bonnie, though, because Bonnie's whole thing is like, is that why you killed my dad? Is that why you basically, you know, took my dad's brain and morals and personality and memories away from him just for the sake of scientific progress? So Bonnie's kind of had enough at this point, and she takes out her trusty lightsaber. She's like, and she holds the lightsaber right at Vegapunk's, like, you know, face. And Vegapunk's on the ground, and he's just, like, begging for mercy. And he's like, oh, please, Bonnie, please put that away. It's defective. It's a failed invention. And then Bonnie is just like, oh, don't give me that. I tested its sharpness out earlier. This thing will definitely cut you. And then Vegapunk's like, no, you don't understand. It's a failure. The light from that lightsaber attracts a crazy amount of bugs. And then Vegapunk is like there, and then Bonnie's like, wait, what? And then they just look up and they just like, bzzz, like an entire army of bugs just start charging toward the beam saber or the lightsaber. And then Bonnie, being absolutely terrified of bugs, clearly, that's something we add to her character, she passes out. She's just like, and then she's on the ground and just like, you know, foaming at the mouth, like, so many bugs. Luffy picks up a stag beetle. He's like, check it out, a giant stag beetle. And Chopper's like, this isn't time for that. So that's a callback to Jaya. There's a few times in the story where Luffy will like collect a stag beetle or some kind of large beetle, like a bug collection, you know, kind of thing. I think he actually gave it to Mashura back during Jaya to the Sariyama Alliance. So that was like, you know, Luffy's gift to them. That's pretty cool anyway, right? Beetles are neat. Let's see. I also thought it would have been funny because it's Egghead and there's a bunch of different people that are researching different aspects of science. Wouldn't it have been funny if like the beam saber attracted a bunch of the bugs and then a bunch of entomologists like just came out of the woodwork and were just like, oh, look at all these bugs. You know, that would have been really funny. So this is where we get to learn a little bit about how Vegapunk has a very high standard for all his inventions. We already knew this already. So as with the case with the lightsaber, I said earlier, like, oh, the lightsaber works pretty well. Probably the reason that Vegapunk didn't like it was maybe the beam was like the wrong color or something like that. Like he wanted a blue lightsaber, he got a green one instead. And he's like, this is a failure. And he just throws it down the trash heap, right? So not quite that, but it was another situation very similar to that with Momonosuke's Devil Fruit. So after this whole situation there, and Vegapunk even says, you know, of course Bonnie wants me dead, Quasar. It makes sense. But then, you know, since Bonnie is passed out at the moment, Vegapunk looks over at Luffy and says, hey, you guys were in Wano, right? And so Luffy's like, yeah, we just came from there. And he's like, was there... Because, you know, the government received reports that there was another dragon on top of Kaido. So they're like, was there another dragon there? And then Luffy's like, oh yeah, that was Momonosuke. You know, he ate the dragon fruit at Punk Hazard or whatever. And then Vegapunk's like, I see, Quasar. You see, that was a devil fruit that I created over the research of many decades, you know, analyzing Kaido's DNA, his lineage factor. And I created this artificial devil fruit. However, it was a complete and utter failure. Never got it to work right. You know, and so Luffy's like, what are you talking about? about. No, 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 old man. No, that devil fruit definitely worked. Momonosuke, he turned into a giant dragon. Yeah, I mean, he has a little bit difficulty controlling it, but he could fire, you know, Boro breaths and lasers. He could pretty much do everything Kaido could do. He's actually like Wano's guardian deity right now. And then Vegapunk just looks right at Luffy and he's just like, yeah, whatever. He can fire Boro breaths, but what color is the dragon? You know? And Luffy's like, pink. And then Vegapunk immediately just starts slamming his head against the ground like, I'm a complete and utter failure. Utter complete failure. You know? And so that's the standard we're working with here, where Vegapunk was dead set on making, you know, a perfect copy of Kaido's dragon, meaning like an Azure dragon. Literally, the name of the devil fruit is the Ua Ua no Mi model Seiryu, or model Azure dragon. So if you don't have an Azure dragon, I guess it is a complete failure there. And so Vegapunk is completely like disappointed in himself. It just like, I tried so hard, but in the end it didn't even matter. You know what I mean? I couldn't make the actual dragon. So most of Vegapunk's inventions that we're going to see from here on out, there's probably going to be something wrong with it that he's going to say, but at the end of the day, it's actually going to be perfectly efficient. Like, the lightsaber thing could even work. I mean, it worked on Bonnie, if nothing else. If you face off against somebody that's terrified of bugs, the lightsaber is going to work great. You know what I mean? So the next thing that Vegapunk brings up is the giant robot, okay? Because Luffy's like, oh, did you build this giant robot? Vegapunk says, no, I actually didn't build that. That was built over 900 years ago. Funny thing about that Iron Giant, though, they call it the Iron Giant, which, okay. And they say about 200 years ago, this Iron Giant actually attacked Marijois. And so this is news to a lot of people. Like, we've never heard about this before in the One Piece story, about a giant robot attacking Marijois 200 years ago. And we don't even really know much about the story 200 years ago, okay? Because that's going back pretty far here at this point, right? So, we know a few things, and Robin's actually going to reference one of them, so I was really impressed with that. Well, anyway, so the situation was, this robot climbed the red line 200 years ago and began to stomp around Marijois. Now, it didn't, like, kill anybody, and it ran out of power before it could do any real damage, but the government was obviously terrified of this thing, and they had no idea what's going on, or at least most of the regular citizens didn't know what was going on, so they ordered its immediate destruction. However, the scientists back then, 200 years ago, realized, like imagine that. Imagine it's the year like 1200 or something, and a giant robot attacks, you know, and it's like the king is just like, destroy that monstrosity. The scientists of the day would have no idea what robotics are, but they're like, this is obviously really advanced. We shouldn't destroy this thing. So they kept it on Egghead Island, which implies that Egghead might have been like maybe the government's like island for scientific research. It's just that, you know, it was pretty low tech relatively to where it is right now until Vegapunk showed up and built everything up. But it might have always been the island of research, okay? Like, other people are there just throughout the centuries. It's just that when Vegapunk showed up, he made it into the future land, okay? So they hid the robot there in the junkyard. Vegapunk goes on to say that even accessing the junkyard is not easy. Like, there's like a holographic wall you have to like phase through in order to get to it. And so he's like, congratulations on even finding this place. Luffy and Chopper bring up, oh, well, we didn't try to find the junkyard. We were just old and senile, so we just stumbled upon it. So this harkens back to, remember when the policeman Kuma was firing lasers at them and Bonnie used her ability, made Luffy and Chopper really old? I guess they were just so senile, they were like, Chopper, where are you going? Come over here. And then they just like stumble through a wall and end up in the junkyard. So that's how that goes there. So couple of things. Now we cut over to the Labosphere where Robin's group is, and Shaka's there, and Shaka's also explaining the story of this robot. And like, yeah, 200 years ago, it climbed the red line and attacked Marijois. Robin mentions that, wait a second, 200 years ago, and oh, by the way, Vegapunk mentions it was 200 years ago to the date, like 200 years exactly, not 198 years ago, not 203 years ago, 200 years ago exactly, and I think that's going to be relevant too later on. So Robin says 200 years ago, that was right around the time when the fishman and merfolk movement began to really take off, you know, like their civil rights movements. Remember, prior to 200 years ago, fishmen and merfolk were just classified as fish and nothing else. It was around 200 years ago when they were beginning to be given actual rights. Now, it was still a huge uphill battle, as in the case with like Fisher Tiger and everybody, and slavery is still rampant in the One Piece world, but that's when the movement began, okay? So now it's the question of like, what's the connection between the fishman rights movement and this giant robot that attacked Marijois? something going on with that, okay? Because Robin, like, specifically mentioned that's what happened there, okay? So, I'm under the impression that this robot was obviously built by the Ancient Kingdom. We already knew that. And, you know, maybe after the war was over, like 900 years ago, it was somewhere dormant. You know, maybe in the Red Line or under the Red Line, maybe where Fishman Island was or whatever. And then one day this thing just gets activated by happen chance. Maybe some fishmen or merfolk find it and they accidentally, like, turn it on. And its battery was almost dead, but it had a little bit of juice left in it. So it was just like... And then it has, like, a pre-programmed, like, order in it to attack Marijois. So it's like, attack Marijois, attack Marijois. And then it, like, climbs the red line and begins to attack. And then it runs out of power, okay? Because it, like, only had, like, 1% left in the battery or whatever from, you know, 900 years ago. I guess 700 years from when it attacked Marijois, right? So Shaka brings up, and I wasn't able to replicate this. I based Vega Force 1 on it, but it's not a complete replica. And Frankie's like, what, you even couldn't replicate it? It was built 900 years ago. And Shaka's just like, I don't know what it runs on. The power source is a mystery to me. So Vega Force 1 probably runs on, like, you know, whatever energy, like electricity or some kind of battery or something like that. But the battery, it's not as efficient because whatever it ran on back then, obviously this thing was able to survive 700 years and still work. You know what I mean? This would be like you find a smartphone after 7 centuries and, oh, wow, it still turns on. That's crazy. That's obviously not going to happen. So this power source of this thing, it could be something crazy. Now, I immediately thought it could be solar because we're obviously making references to the sun god Nika. Also, Lilith mentioned, if only I could harness like an eternal flame like a sun. But there's also, it could also be a reference to nuclear power, okay? Let's say that giant robot, the Iron Giant, ran on like plutonium or, you know, uranium or some kind of like chemical like that. What if it's just like, you know, the half-life of that thing lasts forever? Not forever, but a really long time. What if it's some kind of like radioactive material that is like the battery of that thing and then it got like damaged and turned off and then turn back on again, and then it still has a little bit of power left in it, and it could still do something. Maybe like that, I don't know. So solar power, nuclear power, some kind of magic battery, I don't know, man. But that's, you know, it runs on something that even Vegapunk can't wrap his giant brain around yet. Moving on to the last part of the chapter here. First, we have Vegapunk saying that he wants to give something to Bonnie for all the trouble that he's caused her and Kuma over the years. We don't know what that is because first Vegapunk looks at Luffy and says, but first, Luffy, it's amazing that you're here. I'm so glad that you're here. You need to take me off of Egghead Island. And Luffy, we don't actually even see his response to that. All we see is Vegapunk saying, can you take me away from here, from Egghead? And then we immediately cut away. Outside of Egghead, one of the giant mechanized sea beasts gets destroyed by the Cypher Pole government ships that are arriving there. So we see Lucci, Kaku, Hattori, and Stussy all wearing their masks. I believe we've seen Lucci's mask before, but Kaku's is new. He has kind of like a beard to it. And I'm not sure what animal Stussy is supposed to be, but it's like maybe a cat. Something like that. I don't know. It has like frills and then like little ears coming out of it. But anyway, they're arriving there. We also see the Seraphim Kuma in the correct color scheme, like with the white hair. So we didn't see that before. And so Lucci also mentions that Bonnie was reported in the area as well and says, oh, she's troublesome. She keeps slipping away from the government, but we don't need her anymore, so we can eliminate Bonnie as well. So there's obviously a connection there. There's also more random members, like government employees that are there with guns, but I don't think that's really that you should be worried about that. Obviously, Lucci and Kaku and Stussy are the main threat, and the Seraphim Kuma. They're about to dock at Egghead. They get an alert in the Labosphere. Shaka gets an alert that like, intruder, intruder. And so Shaka basically tells them, you know, leave the Seraphim at the dock and then leave. And then the Cypher Pole are like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. And so Shaka knows what's up. You know, he's aware of the situation. So he's like, okay, I'm going to refuse their entry, but they're probably going to be able to land anyway because Rob Lucci's there. So everybody should prepare for battle. And so obviously the Straw Hats know all about Lucci. So Usopp and Nami are like, wait, Lucci as in Rob Lucci? That guy's still around? Oh my God. There's a great scene with Sanji though where Sanji says, you know, Robin, don't worry, how many times that guy comes back for you, I'm going to protect you, okay? So that's a really nice scene because this is a villain they have fought before. And, you know, there's been other villains in One Piece that have reappeared again, like Crocodile and Bellamy and stuff. But in the case with Bellamy, his personality changed a lot since the first time they fought, and Crocodile at Marineford was not Luffy's direct enemy. So here is, I think, one of the first instances. Oh, I guess Buggy. Buggy came back at Logtown and was their enemy, but he was Buggy. This is the first time where it's like, this is a major antagonist the Straw Hats had to face off against in the Enies Lobby arc, and he's back. You know what I mean? He didn't retire, he didn't die, he didn't, you know, move and start a bakery somewhere in the South Blue. You know, Rob Lucci's still a member of the government. He's still here to bring in, you know, everybody involved with this, you know, eliminate Vegapunk and Bonnie and the Straw Hats as well. So I'm interested in seeing exactly who's going to fight Lucci again. If Luffy and Lucci fight, I think it's going to be very brief. I don't think it's going to be the full fight. I think some of the other Straw Hats or the satellite bodies are going to encounter Lucci and fight him as well. And they might be the ones to actually defeat him. So we're going to see where this goes here. Might be Oda's way of showcasing how stronger the Straw Hats have become since Enies Lobby. They can actually deal with Lucci themselves now, okay? So we have the last scene of the chapter, though, where we actually cut back to the Kamabaka Kingdom, which is in Paradise side of the Grand Line. And Kuma is there, and he is being repaired by Lindbergh. Lindbergh is the mink member of the Revolutionary Army in charge of the South Blue, and he's like, you know, like steampunk, so he can kind of like, if there's anybody in the Revolutionary Army that's going to repair Kuma, it's going to be Lindbergh. So they're trying to fix him up. He's all connected to wires and stuff. But then after nowhere, Kuma just kind of like awakens, kind of like how the Iron Giant did, I guess, back in the day. And he gets up and he just starts running, and he keeps falling down because he's so damaged and connected to all this like medical equipment and shit. And so Kuma is there, keeps trying to run away. He's not saying anything. Dragon's there, Ivankov's there, Lindbergh's there. And he's like, where are you going, Kuma? Please stay with us. Koala's there. Please stay with us. The Revolutionary Army like is just beginning. Like the revolution is just beginning. It's happening now. The revolution. You know what I mean? And so Kuma is still moving. He doesn't seem to be staying put. He's still moving there. So obviously maybe Vegapunk pressed something, and then that's going to summon the PX0 to Egghead. This is going to be kind of difficult. Well, not really, because he's in Paradise, and Egghead's obviously in the New World, but the PX0 still has the paw fruit, so he could just whoop, and then send him flying. I guess that could work too. Maybe some other of the Revolutionary Army will come with him too. Maybe like Dragon or Ivankov will try to grab Kuma, and then Kuma will send them all flying toward Egghead. So maybe that's where Luffy will meet his dad, and Ivankov will be back and stuff like that. Maybe that'll happen, who knows. But the last scene of the chapter is Ivankov, Kuma, and Jinbei, and not Jinbei, and Dragon in sort of like a three-way split screen. There's also a break next week, so there's that. Actually, that just helps me out, so, you know, I get more time to rest my voice. With that being said, I think I'm going to end it right here, because it is starting to get kind of painful. But I really appreciate everybody just being patient with me and everything like that. I know this review wasn't really at my best, but I wanted to get this out, of course, on now, because the official came out today. And so if I do another video tomorrow, I'll just try to keep it easy and just try to, you know, work at it, because, yeah. But I'll be all right. Don't worry about me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Tekking, signing out.